Well, my ranking of Series 1 episodes actually got a better response than I was expecting, so I'm more than happy to come back and do Series 2. Thank you to everyone who watched that video and gave me the great feedback. I loved hearing everyone's lists, especially the ones that were really different to mine. It's really nice hearing about different people's opinions. Back to Series 2. Overall, I actually like it more than Series 1, because the production and stories really stepped up, and gave us some really memorable episodes, as well as some not so memorable ones, which we'll get to. Once again, this is my own list with my own opinions, which may differ greatly from other people's lists. Please let me know in the comments what your own ranking is so we can compare, and I apologise in advance if you find any of my picks really offensive. If you like this sort of thing, then please like the video, leave a comment and subscribe for more. It really helps. Now, on to the ranking. Unlike Series 1, I don't really have a hard time picking a last place episode here. I think Edward and Trevor's friendship was more interesting since they had similarities in being old and worn out, but when it comes to Thomas and Trevor, I really don't care that much. The harbour set is nice, and Thomas's low-key prejudice against the traction engine feels a bit odd. It's not a bad episode, but definitely my least favourite. Engines interacting with animals wasn't really something that happened much up until now, apart from that one time when a goat ate the Fat Controller's hat. Seeing the engines get embarrassed by cows of all things is hilarious, and that's all that really is to this episode. That and Ringo Starr's way of saying moo just tickles me.
Moo, she said sadly. Moo, said the cow.
It sounds so sad. This is the introduction to Trevor the Traction Engine, who strikes up a friendship with Edward, over being old-fashioned and worn out. It's a nice little episode with two characters becoming friends, but I really don't like Trevor that much. Maybe it's his weird little tiny face, or the, stuff he likes. The episode that introduced the first female engine is a fun one. I especially like the character interactions between Daisy and the others. I love how when Percy first meets Daisy, his first reaction is just to ask the Fat Controller when she's going to leave. Okay, she's here now, but when's she going? Could she go soon, please? Watching her complain about things and try to act high and mighty while the others log on is great. Smack talking the other carriages and leading them to being so annoyed that they have to be taken away is brilliant. Also, this line.
Feeble, feeble, spluttered Daisy.
Percy is going around being his usual cheeky self, annoying the bigger engines. I really like the trick he plays on James and the subsequent response. It's pretty funny.
Oh, said James. Oh, where's Percy?
The payoff at the end is kind of lame though. I mean, they just tricked Percy into reading a signal wrong. Was that it? Kind of anticlimactic, I think. This episode has really nice sets. I love the way the viaduct looks, with all that added construction equipment and the lovely music playing as the engines cross. I always like seeing environmental storytelling, with things affecting the setting the stories take place in, with the equipment gradually increasing over time, showing just how long this is taking. With a busy railway and lifestyle based around engines working on a schedule, it's natural that they'd get really annoyed by lateness. It's not a particularly exciting or memorable episode, it's more just like a stressful slice of life episode set during a busy period on the railway. Christmas episode, woohoo! The snow sets in this season look wonderful again, especially this one with the castle in the back. That should come as no surprise by now though. The party at the end is lovely to see it outdoes the first one, but why is Diesel there? Did he get invited back just for the occasion? Another thing, when Santa comes there's this line.
Percy and Toby smiled. They knew who it was.
This always intrigued me as a kid, because you'd probably just assume it means that they know it's Santa, but I took it as meaning that they'd actually been involved with this plot of Santa riding down on Harold, off screen, and they're happy that their work is being paid off. It's like, oh yeah, we did this, I hope everyone else enjoys it. This episode stands out to me based on a really weird line reading from Ringo here.
Your ugly fizz is enough to frighten anyone, said Thomas.
Why does he pronounce face like that? It's like he's saying fiss. Anyway, the hay scattered about everywhere makes for an interesting background whenever you see it. And the sight of Percy getting smothered in treacle and in hay is quite memorable. It's a nice follow-up to Daisy's introduction episode, and I really like the trucks being annoyed by an engine unfamiliar to their turf, ordering them about and retaliating for it. It adds a sort of nice little social structure to the trucks that we never really see. The crash at the end is awesome, and if we assume that the brake vans are sentient, did Percy just accidentally kill it?
Percy sighed. The trucks groaned beneath his wheels.
Oh, I guess not then. The end of the episode is a bit odd, because it offhandedly references something from Bullseye's, an episode from a later season. If you were watching this in chronological order, then you'd have to pause this, quickly go watch Bullseye's, then come back and resume this one. As much as I like parts of this episode, I can't help but feel like the pacing is really weird. Okay, so it begins with Thomas being unwell and getting carted off, so Duck takes over his work, which by itself would have been a fine episode. I would have loved to have seen Duck spending more time on Thomas's railway, doing everything he does, travelling down his branch line, working with Annie and Clarabelle. It would be a nice little, oh, here's this engine doing the stuff that this other engine usually does, spending some time in his shoes. But then after about 2 minutes, Thomas is brought straight back, and it's said that he was jealous but quickly got over it. Again, this is something that would have been fine as his own episode, as Thomas tries to come to grips with the fact that someone else can do what he does, and he learns to accept Duck. I mean, they barely have any interactions as there is. So that's 2 stories crammed into one there, I think. But then, it's after that the actual runaway happens, as his time in the works has affected his breaks. Look, the music here is awesome, and I love this build-up to the iconic runaway theme.
Suddenly, he felt his wheels begin to move. He tried to stop, but he couldn't without his driver and fireman. He tried to whistle a warning, but he couldn't do that either. The guard, driver, fireman, and passengers were all stranded on the platform.
But I hate how it only plays for a few seconds before it immediately cuts into Harold's theme. So as I said, this is an episode that has really weird pacing, and it feels like 3 different stories mashed into one, and I think it suffers for it. Those 3 stories could be great by themselves, but mashed into one, The sets here are lovely. I mean, yeah, it's snow, and having Donald and Douglas save Henry to earn their redemption is great. The engines consistently getting the pronunciation of deputation wrong is also hilarious.
A depistation. Desperation. Disputation.
This line always weirded me out as a kid though.
Hi, squeaked Percy. I can't.
I thought Percy was just saying hi. Is he saying I? As in me? What? The first episode of Series 2 is pretty good, with that opening shot accompanied by the familiar yet updated music, doing a great job of introducing us to this new series. I don't know why Thomas seems to act so high and mighty over his blue paint though. I mean, wasn't that James's thing? The back and forth between Thomas and Percy throughout the episode is really fun. Diesel is a crafty bugger, and following the events of Pop Goes the Diesel, he seeks revenge against Duck, who he thinks intentionally caused the misery. Because the other engines already had a negative impression of Duck, I imagine it made them more susceptible to Diesel's lies. I always really liked the shot of Diesel moving up and down between the trucks while his sinister music plays. The episode ends on a real downer, which doesn't get resolved until the next episode, but you'll have to wait to see what they have to say about that one. This episode is memorable for introducing the first real villain, Diesel. He's really smarmy and sly, immediately trying to get into everyone's good books, but Duck sees right through it. His smug aura is so powerful that Duck's eyebrows come clean off here. The scene at the end when Diesel is struggling with the trucks is extremely unsettling to me, with him moving back and forth straight into the camera, especially while growling, wearing that face. Honestly, nightmare-inducing. The twin terrors Bill and Ben are introduced here, and they're a joy to watch. They're like irritating little 10-year-olds, really naive and playful, and they also annoy each other. The Clayworks isn't a set we see often this season, and it's a shame because I think it looks great. The suspense of the build-up to reveal the Diesel is really well done, with that music and camera work, but it turns out to be a nice subversion when it's revealed that Boko is actually really pleasant. The fan favourite Duck has his first appearance here, and he makes quite a stir. By now, the other engines have gotten used to doing things their own way, and having a newcomer show up to throw a spanner in the works is wonderful. He does not take any of their nonsense. A great introduction to Duck, and I love the way Ringo says, "Rubbish." This is a really exciting episode, and it starts with a nice little jingo from Ringo that I sometimes hum to myself.
Oh dear, what can the matter be? Sang the fireman, Johnny so long ago.
When Bertie shows up and Edward's driver explicitly says that there's no need to bother with him, I find it amusing because of how on the nose it is. It's like, oh yeah, he definitely doesn't have our passengers or anything. Boy, wouldn't that be inconvenient if he did. The chase that follows as Bertie races to catch up with Edward is really fun, and having the bus as the star of the episode is awesome. This is probably the most nostalgic episode of the series to me, because I watched it all the time on VHS as a kid, and it's always stuck with me. It took me years to actually find out what conceited means though. The sight of the engines with their eyes closed is interesting because it's something we rarely see. The crash is awesome, with Thomas ominously rolling forward down the line, until he comes crashing straight through the wall. I do have to question why a house would be so close to the buffers though. That just seems like a massive safety hazard. This painting on the wall at the end is weirdly realistic looking. I just kind of assumed that everyone in this universe looked like models, so I'm really unsure of the implications of this. I can remember watching every episode of the classic series as a kid, but for whatever reason, that excludes this one. I honestly have no recollection of ever seeing it at all, whether it's due to not owning a VHS with it on or what. It's actually a great episode though, with awesome looking nighttime sets, and a really funny ending with Gordon getting scared by Bill and Ben. It's a simple story, but it's a fun one. I'm fully prepared for any flack over not having this episode being higher than you might expect, but I have my reasons. From a narrative perspective, this episode is very good. Arguably Edward's best. His struggle to get his passengers home is really intense, and his expressions coupled with the music really sells it. It's a great story showcasing just how tenacious the old Blue engine is. But the main thing holding this episode back and keeping it from the top 3 is purely the production. Now, you already know I love the modelling and set design of this show, because I've praised it enough, and I consider it very important when looking at these stories as viewing experiences. Remember, this is a TV show. You need to be visually stimulated as well as enjoying the story. That's just my opinion though. I honestly believe that this episode could have benefited more from having been made during a later series instead of Series 2. Other than snow and wind, they haven't really nailed down weather effects yet, and the stormy rainy weather is such a big part of the episode, which makes Edward's job more difficult. Other than the sounds and a slightly darker lighting, there's no indication of any rain at all, and it honestly just looks like a normal day. There's also his accident when his crank pin breaks. In the book, we actually see this happening, and it looks extremely painful for Edward. In the show, it's just his regular model that they take his wheel things off. I appreciate that they did what they could with what they had, but since the issues experienced by Edward are so integral to his ordeal, I think it would have been way better to actually see them. It kind of sullies the immersion a bit, because I consider visuals to be so important to these episodes. Remember, you're watching them on a TV, way different to reading them in a book. Yeah, the stories are good, but, making it look believable on screen and keeping you engaged, especially for younger audiences, is really important. If I were just considering the story, it would be much higher, but sadly, it pains me to say this, the production side of it kind of lets this episode down. These next episodes are all fantastic, and trying to put them in order like this was difficult. Break Van is the introduction to Donald and Douglas, and it's an exciting episode with a really hateable antagonist in the titular Break Van. I really like the zoom-in shot of the van with evil sounding music playing at the start. Ringo's Scottish accent is certainly something.
Well, 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 said Douglas. Surely, James, it wasn't a you.
The signal box crash is cool enough, but it's the episode's climax with the brake van being torn to pieces on the hill. We see its face being lifted away with a bruise. Is it still alive or what? I wonder what happened to it. Spooky episodes of Thomas are among the most memorable, with Duncan getting spooked being my absolutely favourite episode of the whole show. Here, we have the first spooky episode of them all. The atmosphere is creepy as hell, with the music and nighttime sets full of mist that really sets the scene, especially in the sets we've already seen before. Just seeing them here under different lighting with all the mist looks really cool. The production work is one of the main reasons I think Classic Thomas is so great, and this episode is an awesome example of that. Thomas's reaction at the end here is hilarious.
Oh dear, exclaimed Thomas. It's getting late. Oh, I'd no idea. Oh, I must find Annie and Clarabelle.
The race between an engine and a helicopter gives us some really nice visuals and music, and I really love the overhead shots from Harold looking down at Percy underneath. The camera work in Series 2 has just been stellar throughout, and this is just another example of that. Harold is kind of smug, but not in a horrible sort of way, it's just the way he is. He doesn't even apologise or anything at the end, which I almost admire. I like to think he just enjoyed it and moved on, free to continue in his ways but also silently acknowledging Percy's worth. They're like friendly rivals. One of, if not the best chase sequence in Classic Thomas. The episode begins with some nice relaxing activity on the line, as Duck works alongside Edward following the events of Dirty Work. It's when they're finished there that the episode really kicks off though. Duck pleasantly rolls down the hill while his friendly theme plays, and then all hell breaks loose, as the trucks he'd been previously pulling break loose, and begin rapidly rolling down after him, while shrieking with chaotic glee about how they want to chase him, throw him, bump him off the rails. The narration is awesome, and Ringo really sells the madness. Duck hurries ahead as the trucks catch up to him, and then propel him forward like a rocket, as the intensity is ramped up as he enters more busy areas where other engines are working. The spectacular crash as Duck hits the barber shop following some quick thinking is chaotic and messy, and once again I have to question, who builds these lines so close to occupied buildings? Duck getting shaving foam all over his face is a funny sight, and the story ends with a nice resolution, as Duck is praised for his bravery and welcomed back to the railway. This episode honestly feels like a miniature movie. It's got a great setup, with an example of Edward doing something that annoys the other engines, which in turn leads to them badmouthing him for being old and worn out. It's shown that not everyone agrees, and Thomas defends his blue buddy. Then, sometime later, we get some general slice of life stuff, with a regular day of working at the railway, with some more setup sprinkled in that eventually leads to the incident. It's weirdly calm, but you can tell something is up. No eyebrows, Edward sets off to catch up with James, who is just happily rolling down the line while his jovial theme plays. But suddenly that joy turns to terror, as he realises that he cannot stop, and his own theme gives way to the runaway theme. And that's where you know it gets real. The narration here is great, with some real fear in the voice, and the camera work as the two engines thunder down the line is brilliant, with all these different angles. Any episode where Edward gets to prove himself is really good. This one just has the visuals to back it up. Like with my Series 1 ranking, this episode may come as a bit of a surprise, and probably doesn't occupy the same spot as other people's top ones. I adore this episode though. For starters, I love the set design here. The harbour is my favourite location from this series, and I love all the machinery and equipment they put in. It feels like a proper, gritty industrial location. It already looks really good in the daytime, but the nighttime scene during Percy's rescue looks incredible too, with that darkened backdrop and machinery lit up with the lights. And the sight of Percy suspended up in the air by that crane just works really well. I imagine that crane prop would have to have been really strong to hold up the engine. Also, you can see Diesel in the background here. The music is wonderful, with a unique harbour theme at the beginning as Henry travels through the harbour. And this variation of the busy station theme as Thomas is next to the gas cylinder always stood out to me. Something about the way the camera just pans down while the music plays really stood out to me as a kid. It's like a really unique shot to me. And of course, Percy's happy little theme, transitioning into the scary danger theme as his accident happens.
I like. Every wise engine knows that you cannot trust trucks.
Ooh, that transition was really good. The story is great, and has a really nice callback to Down the Mine, as Thomas advises Percy about danger signs, using his own experience to advise Percy. Naturally, Percy has to find out the hard way, and decides to instead tempt fate by actually asking the trucks to bump him past the board, thinking he'll be able to stop when he wants. Of course, this doesn't work out for him, and he rolls straight into the sea, which looks a bit like really thin gravy. Unfortunately, there's another instance here of another story being referenced that we haven't actually seen yet, when Percy mentions the events of Percy's promise to Bill and Ben, which we wouldn't actually see until the next season. This means that currently the timeline of events looks like this. The story may not be as impactful or interesting as, say, Edward's exploit, but it's good enough, and all the other parts of the episode really makes up for it on all fronts. And it's a wonderful episode I'm happy to revisit whenever. My favourite episode of Series 2. Well, that's the end of that ranking. Once again, I hope I didn't upset anyone with my list. And honestly, if that's something which annoys you in the first place, then that's not on me. Series 2 has a lot of really good episodes, and ranking them like this was difficult because most of them are great, and it shows off what an upgrade it was from Series 1. If you haven't seen my Series 1 ranking, then please check that out, as well as some of my other content. Some of it's Thomas, some of it is game stuff, and some more bits sprinkled in. I'll see you next time for whatever comes next, whether it's Series 3 or something else. Thank you for watching and have a lovely day.